Good evening. Tonight we have with us Brian Wilson, who is a well-known activist and especially focusing on peace in Central America, and that will be what his talk is about tonight, is how to achieve peace in Central America and what we can do to promote that role. He is the co-director of the Institute for Nonviolence, and that is his main activity. And that was instituted shortly after his accident in the Concord Naval Station, where he was run over by a train in pursuit of stopping the train that was carrying ammunitions to Central America to promote war in Central America. So he is a very active person in promoting peace, and we'd like to welcome him tonight. And one more comment, there will be a reception following the talk after the questions and answers here in the same room. So we'll welcome Brian Wilson.
Thank you for inviting me to, is this Central Iowa or Northern Iowa? And I also understand there's a tornado warning on tonight, so if anybody hears that it's coming this way, please let me know. I'll follow you wherever you go. I would like to talk tonight about complicity, responsibility, and empowerment. And the only way I know how to talk about those things is to talk about, at least to some extent, my own evolution from a small town, lower working class kid in western New York State to the tracks at Concord, the Concord Naval Weapons Station. I also want to talk about 5 factors that I think make it inevitable for us in this country and in other first world countries to either decide that we're going to have our own revolution or perish. In other words, either we change or we perish. I want to talk about the 5 factors that I think make it so clear what our choices are, our rational choices. And some signs of hope that I see around this country and the world. I'm the most unlikely person to be standing here talking to you. I'm the most unlikely person to have fasted for 47 days in 1986 with 3 other veterans on the Capitol steps, to have been traveling in the war zones of Central America, trying to find out for myself what's going on, and to be somebody that would decide to sit on the tracks challenging a train, thinking, of course, that I'd be arrested for the very first time in my life, I might add. I grew up in a town called Asheville, New York, 300 people. Just a regular working class town that was part agricultural and part a community for people who worked in the factories 10 miles away. Everybody was lower working class in my town. As far as I know, everybody was reactionary, because it seemed like everybody thought pretty much the same way. And my parents were certainly very conservative, if not reactionary. I was a Baptist, born-again Christian back in the 50s. I was good in school. I was a good athlete. People in my hometown still remember me as that athlete from the 50s. That's the convenient way to remember me. It's very comfortable and very neat. I was a Boy Scout. I was on the Honor Society in high school. I was on the Student Council. I had a chance to play professional baseball. Went off to college. Didn't get 1 degree, I got 3 degrees. One of the few kids out of my high school class of 25 students that went to college. Everybody told me that I had a great future. I was going to break the poverty cycle. Wouldn't have to be a working class kid. Go on to college and be successful. Wouldn't have to get my hands dirty. Pay somebody else to do that. So I believed in all of this. I had no reason not to believe it. And I took it very seriously. In my early years of college, I wanted to be an FBI agent. I even studied Russian at the university, hoping to be a counterintelligence agent, fighting communism. George Washington University in Washington, D.C. But then I decided to be a minister. So I transferred to a Baptist college, where I graduated. And I was off, I thought, to seminary. In fact, in my senior year at that Baptist college, I talked at one of our required chapels about the need for us to bomb the Vietnamese into oblivion if necessary to stop the spread of communism once and for all. But then I went through another change. I decided to go to law school instead of seminary, so I went to law school. I thought that was the best way I could be a good citizen. And then I was drafted. I was actually one of the few persons I ever met that was drafted with a 2S deferment, the days when we had school deferments, from a very rural selective service board that ran out of eligible males to meet their quota and had to go into the 2S pool, the school pool, deferment pool. And so I joined the Air Force rather than going in the Army, doing 4 years instead of 2, and felt perfectly okay about that. In 1969, I was sent to Vietnam as a commander of a security unit, six-man fire teams and 2 mortar units to protect an air base down in the Delta. It was not quite what I thought I was going to be doing in the Air Force, but there I was. I had even been sent to Fort Campbell, Kentucky for 12 weeks of training just in preparation for Vietnam. Trained by the Army. Patrols and ambushes. I said, boy, this is something, being in the Air Force and being trained to do patrols and ambushes. I thought I'd gotten out of that. Well, we didn't do that, in fact, in Vietnam, but we did have to defend a base that was attacked fairly regularly in the Delta, which was, for Air Force, was bad enough. Little did I know when I gave that talk at chapel in 1964 at this Baptist college, talking about bombing Vietnam to stop the spread of communism, that 5 years later I would be walking through villages in Vietnam right after the bombing missions. It was one of my other duties in Vietnam. I worked for a Vietnamese commander, base commander, and most of the pilots at our base were Vietnamese pilots, and they didn't trust whether these pilots were, or they were suspecting that these pilots might not be competent in their bombing missions, and they wanted at least one gringo examining the results of these bombing missions. So I had the great job of going in with a lieutenant, Vietnamese lieutenant. I was a first lieutenant in the Air Force at the time, and he was a Vietnamese Air Force lieutenant, going into villages after the airstrikes. I want to tell you that I did have some questions about the war that started creeping into my mind when I was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. For the very first time in my life, I wondered whether I was on the right track. For the very first time in my life. Because in the bayonet training, where you plunge your bayonet into the dummies and shout kill as loud as you can, if any of you have been in the military and basic training, you know, it's just kind of a routine thing. But somehow or other, there was something in me that wouldn't allow me to do it. And I did not know on the day that I was going out to do this particular training on that day that I would have any problems. It was the first sign that I knew something else was going on inside of me. I was almost embarrassed to not be the only one that didn't plunge that bayonet into the dummies. After all, I could do all these training exercises and activities very competently. And all of a sudden I was there feeling like I couldn't do it. I couldn't plunge this bayonet. So I knew there was something else going on, but I didn't know what it was. I just accepted it as the fact that I hoped I wouldn't have to do it in real life. So there I was in Vietnam, walking through this village within a few hours of an airstrike. I saw about 65 young mothers lying on the ground. The whole village had been destroyed. The Vietnamese pilots had done a good job, I guess. They were all young mothers holding their children. They'd been hit by bomb fragments before, I think they'd been hit by the napalm. I looked at one face up close, a woman that couldn't have been any older than 20, with a child in each hand, on each side of her. Her eyes were open. I thought maybe she was alive. But the napalm had burned off her eyelids. So I was looking at her eyes, and I had some kind of an awakening at that point. I said, somehow this is wrong. This is murder. I couldn't see communism on her face. I think what happened at that moment was this whole concept of communism kind of disappeared in a matter of seconds in my mind, or at least as I had been taught it. And I started speaking out against the war in Vietnam. It was the hardest thing I ever did. But somehow or other, I could not let that experience and those experiences go without some expression of what I was feeling. It was an assault on my intellect as well as my moral fabric, that we would be bombing villages and blowing up mothers and children, no matter what we called them. So I was sent home early because I started sending memorandums to my superiors saying the bombing is wrong and it should be stopped, and furthermore, what do you think is happening from the increased bombing of these Vietnamese villages is we're getting attacked more often. Why not? People get pissed off when they get bombed. They go after the planes that are bombing them. Makes sense, doesn't it? So I said it wasn't even good military policy because it was really provoking the Vietnamese. And I could understand why. So I was sent home, and sometimes I say that that was the beginning of the new Brian Wilson. So I'm 20 years old now. It's 20 years ago this month that I walked through that first village. But I've been on a long journey since 1969. I got an honorable discharge, came out as a captain. I think the reason they refused to court-martial me was they knew that I was going to testify on the stand of what I had seen in the villages. It's just my theory. Nobody ever told me why they never followed through with their charges and their threats to prosecute me. I believe it was they did not want me to talk about what I'd seen. You can talk about My Lai, but every bomber pilot and every fighter pilot in Vietnam committed a My Lai every day. It was just done from the air rather than on the ground. You couldn't see the victim's eyes. So from 1969 till the 1980s, I pretty much tried to live business as usual. I finished law school, passed the bar exam, tried to practice law, found out that I no longer had the same values maybe, certainly not the same capacity to proceed with my pre-military plans for my life. Couldn't stand up for the judge. And everybody rise. I found myself not rising. My God, what the hell's going on with me? All you have to do is stand up And then the bailiff says, "You can sit down now," after the judge has entered the chambers. So I knew something probably more profound than I was aware of had happened to me. And I pretty much kind of phased out of being a lawyer fairly early, at least a lawyer with clients in courtrooms. And I did a number of things through the 70s, fairly interesting work, prisoner rights, lobbying in Washington. I did dairy farming for a couple of years. I was a legislative aide for a couple of years in the state of Massachusetts. I owned my own business for 2 more years after that, buying milk and making kefir. If anybody's ever had kefir, it's great. Made kefir 3 days a week, and following each day of making it, I'd go to New York to sell it. Try to maintain a little cash flow. That's the model I'd been taught. See if I couldn't make that work. But something happened to me in the 80s that provoked me some more. I had a flashback to walking through that village, that first village, and seeing that woman's eyes. You see, for 12 years, from 1969 to 1981, I didn't think much about Vietnam. It hardly ever occurred to me that I'd been in Vietnam. I didn't think of myself as a Vietnam veteran. I wasn't a grunt. I was an officer. I hadn't been out looking for people to shoot. But there I was, having a flashback walking through a village. I was a professional person. I shouldn't have to deal with this. I was successful. It's all irrelevant in terms of dealing with Vietnam. So, in the 80s, I've had to deal with Vietnam. Vietnam not just as a historical event, but a metaphor, if you will. A metaphor for this culture that does this over and over and over and over again. A case study of the consciousness of the North Americans. A case study of our barbaric legacies, as I saw it. I began to read and read and read and read. Not just about Native Americans and the history of the labor movement in this country, but about the history of U.S. involvement in Central America for the last 150 years. And then I read a little bit more about our relationships in Africa and Asia. And there were times I didn't want to learn anymore. But I'd get over it, because I didn't want to be duped again. I had been duped once before. I make no bones about it. One of the most embarrassing things to me, the one reason I didn't deal with Vietnam from 69 to 81 as a quote-unquote professional, was in some ways I was embarrassed to tell any of my professional friends that I'd been in Vietnam. They'd all avoided it. When they heard that I was a veteran, and a Vietnam veteran, they were shocked. You? You were in Vietnam? I said, yep. I was at the right age, at the right time. I had no political or philosophical reasons not to go. Well, I found myself there. I said I didn't pull any triggers and I didn't drop any bombs. It didn't matter. I accepted my complicity. And now I was going to accept my responsibility for heeding the lessons, both the burden and the wisdom of Vietnam. One of the issues, one of the questions that I've been asking over and over again these last 8 years, 9 years, is how could we as a society have been so obsessed to go 10,000 miles away, spending $500 billion in the longest war in our history to kill people 5 feet tall? It's pretty irrational when you examine it. An obsession, a psychotic obsession. How is it that we could tolerate such an incredible insanity and barbarism and destruction on people that we didn't know, had never met, didn't understand, didn't even know where it was on the map? What the hell's going on? But then you realize Vietnam's not an aberration. It's a logical extension of U.S. foreign policy that's been going on for a long time. And us Vietnam vets, we were just on the front lines for the society. We didn't think up the idea of the war. We didn't pay for it. We didn't direct it. We were just carrying out the orders. We were told that in a democracy, the foundation of authority is with the people, legally and morally. How could a policy like this be carried out without the consent of the people? What does it mean about our responsibility as citizens? We talked about the Germans. We said they should have sat in front of the death trains. Condemned them for not being responsible citizens. Required Nuremberg trials after the war. Established new rules of behavior for officials and citizens in dealing with illegal orders, requiring, demanding people to commit war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes against peace as they were defined in the Nuremberg trials. Does it apply to us? We said it did during the trials. We said that the United States will abide by these new rules and these new standards of civility so that something like the Holocaust could never happen again. Well, why is it then that we have covert and overt actions going on in 30 or 40 countries around the world as I stand here and you sit here tonight? Why is it that we feel so compelled to be meddling in everybody's business, murdering people, maiming people, blowing up their legs, real people like you and me? Whether it's Mozambique or Namibia or Guatemala or El Salvador or Nicaragua or Chile or Cambodia or Indonesia or even funding $4 billion to the Israelis to continue an occupation. What is it about us that requires us to be so mean? We aren't mean people, are we? We're kind people. We're generous. Certainly always been told that, and I always believed it. Certainly most people can't possibly believe in murdering children and mothers and fathers and blowing up health clinics and schools. And if not, why the hell do we keep doing it? It seems to me that's a very fundamental question. What is it about our character? Is it because we have 5% of the world's population living here that consumes half the world's resources? Could that be a clue? And do we believe it's our right? Well, all these questions were bothering me, were haunting me. What the hell is it about us as a people that enables us to go about our business as usual, our lives as usual, while we're killing people elsewhere, creating the Holocaust in third world countries? As John Stockwell says, we're committing a war against the Third World, the Third World War. Noam Chomsky estimates we've killed 15 million people since World War II. The United States, 2.5 Holocausts. Very few of the bodies were North Americans. Not much visceral reaction here in the United States with all these brown and black-skinned people being killed. We've never dealt with the occupation of the Native Americans in this country. It's as if it really didn't happen. 379 treaties the United States government signed with Native Americans and violated all of them. It's all on the record. I'm not making it up. It's our legacy. It's our heritage. So what are we going to do about it? Well, I got so involved with my own healing process from Vietnam with other veterans that I wound up being named director of a Vietnam Veterans Outreach Center in Massachusetts. Something I never ever occurred to me that I would be participating in. 2 years I did that. Even got a commendation from Governor Dukakis for conduct above and beyond the call of duty to my fellow Vietnam veterans. 12 veteran friends of mine committed suicide trying to deal with this healing process, this adjustment process, trying to be a human being in a Fellini movie script, but not wanting to be part of the script any longer. Wanting to be sane, rational, sensible, honest, truthful, but damn, it's painful. All the lies to unravel. Trying to deal with Vietnam in a society that created Vietnam but doesn't want to deal with it. But we have the blood on our hands. The images are in our minds. Can't forget it now. Too late. It's indelibly marked. It's a lesson. Every lesson is an opportunity. An opportunity to understand, to change, to grow, to develop. How is it that 220 million people in the United States could have waged the longest war in our history against Vietnamese, 10,000 miles away? And how is it that even though it's only 3,000 miles away, we could commit the most barbaric acts against Nicaraguans through our beloved freedom fighters, as our administration calls the Contras, whose only targets are civilians. Health clinics, schools, farmers who have accepted title to land under the land reform program because they're called communists, because they believe in justice, they believe in dignity. Yes, I know probably many of you in this room have worked hard to oppose these programs, these policies. But you know, we're saddled with quite a challenge. It's very formidable. I said it before, but I'll say it again, and I'll probably say it again yet. We have 5% of the world's population, and we consume 50% of the world's resources. Collectively, our ethos, our consciousness, requires us to exploit the world. Lester Brown at the World Watch Institute said that if all 5 billion people on this planet consumed at the rate of North Americans, all the resources would be gone in 7 days. See, we become addicted and a hostage to our consumption, to our lifestyles. It demands us to maraud the world Can't even tolerate Native Americans who had some respect for the land and the earth. We call them savages. We were the civilized. Well, as director of this outreach center, I also realized out in western Massachusetts, rural Massachusetts, 100 miles west of Boston, that there were a lot of homeless people on the streets, and about half of them in Greenfield, Massachusetts were Vietnam veterans. The most we did while I was there was buy about 35 of them sleeping bags to get through the winter. Imagine that, some great program of buying sleeping bags so they wouldn't freeze. This Vietnam thing was really heavy. I realized it more and more. And every time I read a newspaper about El Salvador and Nicaragua, I was reminded of Vietnam. The metaphor. Metaphor about us. About me, quite frankly. About where I was coming from and where was I going and how was I going to deal with my complicity and my responsibility and how was I going to feel empowered to do something besides just talk about it. I resigned from the Outreach Center and I said, I'm going to go to Central America. I've got to taste this foreign policy myself. I've got to taste it personally. I've got to do something to provoke me into some kind of clarity about what I'm going to do in my life. Either I'm going to deal with it or I'm going to go back into denial. It seemed to me that was the choice. After all, it's easy to be in denial in this culture. Everybody promotes it. One of the chronic syndromes of our psychosis. Staying in incredible denial about reality. That's why I call it a Fellini movie. It's like living in the script every day, watching it whirl around. Totally out of touch with reality. But we all believe somehow deeply that we're God's chosen people. We have, many of us, to save the world. That we're good people. So I went to the one country in Central America that did not require a visa, Nicaragua. You just get off the plane and you really basically can go wherever you want to go. I spent 2 months in the country. The very first time I went in January and February 1986. I went to Esteli. I wound up getting connected with the language school in Esteli. So I was living with a Nicaraguan family, which I did for 2 months. And after I was there about 8 or 10 days, the Contras were attacking 3 cooperatives about within 4 kilometers of Esteli. 3 days and nights the battles went on, and I could hear it at night. I could hear the gunfire, and I could hear the mortars, and I could see the tracers. And I was pacing back and forth in this little, what we would call shack, this Nicaraguan home, outraged I could hardly contain myself. I told my Nicaraguan mother, I hear shots out there. I really hear my money. It's killing people, and it's for a lie. I've been through this before, and I'm not going through it again. And then I saw 11 bodies coming into town. 5 mothers. I've been here before. 2 children. I've been here before. 3 land reform workers. Been here before. And 1 farmer who was trying to protect his little plot of ground. I've been here before, God damn it. I'm not going to keep going through this knowing that we're blowing people away. Real people. Real human beings. Worth just as much as I and all of us. But this goes on and on and on. And I tried to rationalize being quote-unquote politically correct. I'd been speaking out against the wars in Central America for several years. But the bodies kept piling up and up and up and up. And then, again, I would read my notes about Chile, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Namibia, Angola, Mozambique. What the hell are we doing? How can we go about our business as usual while we are destroying the world? Not just people, the planet, the very biological foundation of our own existence. It's not very smart, you know. It's not very bright. Pretty foolish. If you can't deal with the morality of it, it's pretty foolish. We're going to lose. My Nicaraguan mother told me, she said, what's important is not how long you live, but that you live each day for the truth. This is from a woman who'd lost 2 sons to the Contras, who believed in the revolution, said, never will we go back to Somoza. We now at least have a government that supports the right of the people to have health care and education as a right. Everybody. Not based on wealth, based on the sovereignty of each human being in Nicaragua. I came back to the United States pretty provoked. I went back to my small town in New England, and for 2 weeks I didn't even want to walk to the post office because I didn't feel capable of talking to any of my friends that I might meet along the way when they would ask me, how are you doing? I didn't feel like I could tell them. Because I had 2 incredible feelings that were so powerful, I couldn't express words to capture the depth of those feelings. One was how angry and enraged I was at how diabolical our policies were, the Contra-terrorists. I didn't even believe that my friends would believe how evil they really were. I didn't even want to have to face that question. First 2 weeks. The other feeling was how incredibly inspired I was to be with the Nicaraguan people, the campesinos who put their lives on the line every day just to go to market, just to maintain their houses, just to farm their little plot of ground because of Contra-terrorists. And they were not going to surrender. It was very inspiring. I'm sure all of you who've been to Nicaragua understand what I'm talking about. I literally stayed off the streets for 2 weeks in a small town where I knew virtually half the town. I'd been there years, both as a businessman and as director of this outreach center. I couldn't face the explosive nature of my own feelings and the disappointment that I was anticipating when somebody said, how are you doing, Brian? How was your trip? And not knowing whether I really wanted to tell them or whether I wanted to say, fine, and then wanted to go vomit. But I got over it. But I wound up selling everything I had. My first wife and I were divorced. Decided to get rid of all my property. So I was going to free myself up. I was going to do something outrageous, I thought. Doesn't sound outrageous to a lot of people, but for me it was outrageous. I was going to be a full-time peace activist. What the hell did that mean? I'd never been much for demonstrations. I had lobbied and written my letters, and been a conscientious civics student, lobbying and applying pressure as I'd been taught in my lessons. about how democracy works. I didn't know what it meant. I just knew that I was going to walk in that direction. I didn't want to have to do it part-time. I wanted to say those people are being murdered in my name and I'm not going to stand for it. And I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I'm going to say it every day in some way. It's important to me personally. Maybe it's not important to anybody else in the world, but it's important to me. It's important for my healing. It's important for my health. It's important for my state of mind. It's important for my self-worth, for my dignity, for my honor, for my blood pressure. And so what did I do? I started seeking out veterans who shared the same sentiments. Somehow or other, I still didn't quite trust people who were not veterans with my feelings, expressing my feelings. And I found a lot of veterans that felt the same way, and so we started organizing. 50 of us went to Washington to lobby against Contra Aid. Of course, they passed it anyways. Bipartisan policy, you know. This new Contra Aid, they said, was a bipartisan policy. Bipartisan aid. What the hell are they talking about? It's been bipartisan for 8 years. Democrats and Republicans have supported it, and the President has signed the appropriations into law. It's pretty bipartisan to me. This one was simply with a little less acrimony. Only 99 Democrats voted against it. So out of that attempt to lobby Congress against Contra Aid, like many of you had already been doing for years, I'm sure, 4 of us veterans decided to go on a fast for life. We did it on the Capitol steps. I don't know if it made any news in Iowa. There was very little news media interested in the fast. But we sat on the steps starting September 1st, 87, 4 normal looking and acting males, all who had been in wars, 3 in Vietnam and 1 in World War II, all jocks. None of us were homeless or drunks or mental patients or drug addicts. We were just in anguish. We weren't going to let our experiences as kill warriors to go unheeded. We wanted to speak to the soul of our country, and we couldn't do it with words, at least not words alone. So we sat on those steps starting September 1st, just drinking water, just plain old water. First week we were there, the only people that talked to us were Capitol Police, who were all Vietnam vets. Kind of a nice time. We had a radio there. We listened to ball games. We read a little Gandhi, a little King. By the 4th week, and the 5th week, as we were losing more weight, we'd have 800-900 people with us on the steps of the Capitol. 4 weeks earlier, we thought, well, at least we'll have made it clear that 4 of us, even if nobody else talks to us or knows about it, at least 4 of us are making it clear that these murders are not going to be conducted in the names of the 4 of us. We want to make it crystal clear. These policies don't represent us. We don't want it to be a secret. We don't want it to be known just among our friends, best we can. We don't want it to be known simply by virtue of our letters. We want it to be known by sitting out in the public marketplace, graphically communicating our feelings as best we could. The depth of what we feel, our anguish, our agony over our nation that we said was in a state of moral emergency, murdering mothers and fathers and children. Imagine this going on and on and on and on. What kind of dignity is there in a civilization that is founded on exploitation, murdering people who want just a little bit of justice, just a little bit of land, no big deal, just want a little bit? Not if we have anything to say about it. What kind of a civilization are we? So that's what we were all about. And we also said we're going to be proxy representatives of those people in Central America who are dying, who can't be here. We want people to see what it's like to die. Not because we wanted to die, but because we were willing to die to save lives. For peace this time, for our conscience this time, not for somebody else's order or command. Not to go kill people under the guise of stopping communism, but waging unconditional peace with our lives.